The Velcor conclave had ruled the Andrasi sector for 11,000 years. Their ships were monuments to perfection, sleek, efficient, built from alloys that could withstand the heat of dying stars. Their diplomats spoke in mathematical certainties. Their warriors moved like clockwork. Everything they did was calculated, measured, optimized, and then they met humanity. The first encounter happened near the Hollow Drift, a stretch of space so barren that most species avoided it entirely. The Velcor had been charting resources when their sensors picked up something impossible. A ship. Not just any ship. A human ship. It was cobbled together from at least 6 different vessel types, held together with what looked like industrial adhesive and sheer willpower. It shouldn't have been flying. It definitely shouldn't have been accelerating at speeds that made the Velcor's engineers question their own instruments. Captain Relis of the Velcor fleet stood on the bridge of the Ascendant Truth, staring at the data streams with something approaching horror. "That vessel is structurally unsound," he said flatly. "It should have torn itself apart 3 acceleration cycles ago." His second-in-command, a younger Velcor named Thessa, tilted her head. "Perhaps they don't know that. Ignorance doesn't suspend the laws of physics. The human ship, SS Reckless Ambition, according to the transponder, didn't respond to hails. It just kept moving, carving through space like a drunk comet. When the Velcor finally managed to intercept it, they found something even more baffling. The humans were laughing. The boarding party entered cautiously, weapons drawn, expecting hostility or at least fear. Instead, they found a crew of 12 humans standing in what could generously be called a cargo bay, surrounded by crates labeled "definitely not explosives" and "open at your own risk." One of them, a tall woman with grease-streaked hair and a grin that belonged on someone who'd just survived something they absolutely shouldn't have, waved casually. "Hey! You guys here for the party?" Captain Relis stepped forward, his mandibles clicking in confusion. "You are traveling at unsafe velocities in an unstable vessel through restricted space. Explain yourselves." The woman, her name was Captain Elena Vasquez, they would later learn, shrugged. "We're testing a new engine design. Well, new is generous. We found some old Thresk parts, combined them with a human warp coil, added a little duct tape and optimism, and boom, fastest trash heap in the sector. That is not how engineering works." "Yeah, well, tell that to the engine. It's been working great for 3 weeks. Thessa leaned toward Relis. "Captain, their fusion core is held in place with—" "Is that wire?" Elena overheard. "Reinforced wire. Big difference. The Velcor didn't arrest them. They couldn't. There was no legal framework for what the humans had done because no sane species would have attempted it in the first place. Instead, they issued a formal warning, impounded the ship for safety concerns, and sent the humans on their way aboard a Velcor transport. 3 days later, the Reckless Ambition vanished from impound. Security footage showed 2 humans sneaking into the hangar, one of them literally whistling while they hot-wired their own ship back to life. They left a note. "Thanks for the tune-up. The stabilizers you added were a nice touch." That was humanity's introduction to the Velcor conclave. It would not be the last time the galaxy underestimated them. The second encounter happened 6 months later, and it was far less amusing. The Cathera were an ancient predator species, apex hunters who had conquered 40 systems through sheer brutality. They didn't negotiate. They didn't trade, they took. Their warships were biological nightmares, grown rather than built, equipped with plasma cannons that could melt through hull plating like it was butter. When the Cathera set their sights on human colony worlds in the outer reaches, the galaxy watched with morbid curiosity. The humans had no military to speak of. Their ships were still mostly retrofitted cargo haulers. Their weapons were outdated. By every logical measure, they should have been wiped out in a matter of weeks. But logic the galaxy was learning didn't apply to humans the way it applied to everyone else. The Cathera's first assault targeted New Havana, a mining colony on a moon orbiting a gas giant. The attack was textbook, swift, overwhelming, designed to break morale and force surrender. 3 Cathera dreadnoughts descended on the colony, plasma cannons charging, ready to reduce the settlement to ash. They were met by a minefield. Not a sophisticated military minefield. A minefield made from hollowed-out asteroids packed with explosives and remote detonators. The colonists had spent 3 months rigging the entire approach vector with improvised bombs, turning their own moon into a death trap. When the Cathara ships entered the field, the humans detonated everything at once. The explosion lit up the entire system. 2 dreadnoughts were crippled instantly. The third tried to retreat, only to find that the humans had also rigged their escape route. By the time the dust settled, the Cathara fleet was drifting wreckage, and the colonists were already salvaging parts for new defenses. When the Cathara sent a second fleet, a larger one, determined to make an example of New Havana, they found the colony gone. Not destroyed. Gone. The humans had packed up the entire settlement, moved it to a different moon, and left behind a series of decoys broadcasting false signals. The Cathara wasted 2 weeks bombarding empty structures before they realized they'd been tricked. It was humiliating. It was infuriating, and it was just the beginning. The war dragged on for 2 years. The Cathara threw everything they had at humanity: fleets, bioweapons, orbital bombardments. And every single time, the humans found a way to survive. They didn't win through superior firepower or advanced technology. They won through insanity. They weaponized their own atmosphere, turning entire planets into chemical bombs. They hacked Cathara bioships and reprogrammed them to attack their own fleets. They even launched a counter-invasion using nothing but repurposed mining drones and a truly staggering amount of explosives. The turning point came at the Battle of Ashford's Belt, a massive asteroid field that the Cathara had chosen as a staging ground for their final assault. The human fleet, if you could call it that, was outnumbered 10-1. Their ships were still mostly civilian vessels with guns bolted onto the hull. By all accounts, they should have been slaughtered. Instead, they did something no one expected. They rammed, not just one ship, all of them. The entire human fleet accelerated to maximum velocity, aimed themselves at the Cathara capital ships, and crashed into them like kinetic missiles. Shields meant to withstand energy weapons couldn't handle raw mass moving at relativistic speeds. The Cathara fleet was torn apart in minutes. Half the human ships survived. The crews ejected in escape pods moments before impact, floating in space, watching the explosions like fireworks. When Velcor rescue teams arrived, because of course the Velcor had been monitoring the battle, they found the humans celebrating. One pilot was literally doing flips in zero gravity while his crewmates cheered. Captain Relis, now promoted to High Commander of the Velcor fleet, floated in his own rescue shuttle, staring at the carnage in disbelief. "They won," he said quietly. Thessa, now his chief strategist, nodded. "They did. By crashing into the enemy. Yes. That is not a valid military strategy. Apparently, it is." Relis was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Thessa. "We need to study them." Agreed. The war ended 3 months later when the Cathara leadership sued for peace. Not because they were defeated, they still had fleets, resources, and colonies, but because they were exhausted. Fighting humans wasn't like fighting anyone else. Every battle was unpredictable. Every victory came with a cost that didn't make sense until later. The Cathara had conquered 40 systems, but they couldn't conquer a species that refused to follow the rules. When the treaty was signed, the Cathara warlord made one request. "Just tell us why." The human ambassador, a grizzled woman named Commander Sarah Okoye, smiled. "Why what? Why do you fight like this? Why do you take such insane risks? Why do you keep going when any rational species would have surrendered?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, her smile widening. "Because giving up isn't in our nature. You thought you could break us, but you forgot something important." "What?" "We've been breaking ourselves for thousands of years. You're not special." The peace didn't last. Not because the Cathara broke it, they had learned their lesson, but because the galaxy itself was fracturing. The Velcor conclave, for all their precision and logic, had built their empire on a lie. They claimed to be peacekeepers, arbiters of order in a chaotic universe. But beneath that polished exterior was a darker truth. They controlled the flow of resources, technology, and information across dozens of systems. They decided who prospered and who starved. And for 11,000 years, no one had been able to challenge them until humanity arrived. It started small. Human traders began undercutting Velcor shipping rates, offering faster deliveries at half the cost. Human engineers reverse-engineered Velcor technology and improved it, then sold the upgrades on open markets. Human diplomats, loud, chaotic, and completely unconcerned with protocol, started brokering deals between species that the Velcor had kept deliberately separate. The Velcor Council watched this with growing alarm. High Commander Relis, now the de facto leader of the Conclave's military, called an emergency session. The chamber was vast, crystalline, lit by bioluminescent panels that pulsed in time with the speaker's thoughts. 12 council members sat in a circle, their expressions unreadable. "The humans are destabilizing the sector," Relis said bluntly. "Not through military force. Through chaos. They are disrupting centuries of carefully balanced systems." One of the counselors, an elder named Vexus, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "They are not violating any treaties. They don't need to. They're rewriting the rules just by existing." Another counselor, Cray, spoke up. "Perhaps that is not a bad thing." The chamber fell silent. Cray was young by Velcor standards, only 3 centuries old. But she had risen quickly through the diplomatic corps. She had spent the last year embedded with human colonies, observing, learning. What she had seen had changed her. "The humans do not operate on our logic," she continued. "They do not seek order. They seek possibility. And in doing so, they are showing other species that there are alternatives to our way." Relis's voice was sharp. "You sound like you admire them." "I do." The council erupted in clicking, hissing debate. Cray waited for the noise to die down, then stood. "We have ruled for 11,000 years by controlling variables, by eliminating uncertainty. But the humans thrive in uncertainty. They create it, and the more we try to contain them, the more they will slip through our fingers." Vexus leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" "That we stop trying to control them. That we learn from them instead." Relis slammed a limb against the table. "Absurd. We are the Velcor. We do not learn from lesser species." Cray turned to him, her eyes glowing with quiet defiance. "Then perhaps we are not as superior as we believe." The turning point came 6 months later, in a crisis that no one saw coming. The void rift had always been there, a massive tear in space-time at the edge of the Andrasi sector, spewing radiation and spatial anomalies. The Velcor had quarantined it centuries ago, built warning beacons and forbade all travel near it. It was a scar on reality itself, and the best solution was to leave it alone. Then it started growing. At first the expansion was slow, a few kilometers per cycle, barely noticeable. But within weeks it had doubled in size, then tripled. Entire star systems were being swallowed, their matter torn apart and redistributed as raw energy. The Velcor's best scientists ran simulations and came to a horrifying conclusion. If the rift wasn't stopped, it would consume the entire sector within a year. The council convened again, this time in full panic. Their options were limited. They could evacuate, abandon billions of lives and countless worlds. They could try to collapse the rift using antimatter charges, but the energy required was staggering, and there was no guarantee it would work. Or they could do nothing and hope the rift stabilized on its own. It was Cray who suggested the fourth option. "Ask the humans." Relis stared at her. "You cannot be serious. They survived a war they should have lost. They build ships that shouldn't fly. They solve problems by ignoring the rules. If anyone can find a solution we haven't considered, it's them." The council debated for hours. In the end, desperation won. A delegation was sent to Earth, the human homeworld, a blue-green marble orbiting a yellow star, teeming with life and noise and chaos. The humans listened to the Velcor's problem with the same intensity they brought to everything, barely contained excitement. The human solution was, predictably, insane. "We're going to plug it," said Dr. Amara Chen, a physicist who looked far too young to be leading humanity's top scientific minds. She was standing in a cluttered lab aboard a human research station, surrounded by holographic displays and half-assembled machinery. Relis blinked. "Plug it? Yep, like a drain. The rift is spewing energy because there's an imbalance, too much matter being compressed into too small a space. So we're going to create a counterbalance, a massive gravitational anchor that pulls inward instead of outward." Thessa, who had accompanied Relis, leaned closer to the hologram. "That would require an object with the mass of a small star." "Exactly." Amara grinned. "We're going to use a black hole." "You have a black hole?" "Not yet, but we know where to get one." The plan was audacious even by human standards. There was a dormant black hole in a nearby system, barely 2 solar masses, stable and crucially movable if you had the right equipment. The humans proposed using a fleet of gravitational tugs to drag the black hole to the rift, then position it at the exact center. The black hole's gravity would counteract the rift's expansion, effectively capping it. Relis listened to the entire explanation in stunned silence. When Amara finished, he said, "This plan has a 97% chance of failure." "Sure, but it's got a 3% chance of success. That's better than zero." "That is not how risk assessment works," Amara shrugged. "It's how human risk assessment works." The operation took 3 months to prepare. The Velcor provided resources, ships, energy, personnel, but it was the humans who did the heavy lifting. They built the gravitational tugs from scratch, using a combination of Velcor technology and human improvisation. They recruited volunteers from a dozen species, including several Kithara who had fought against humanity just years earlier. When the fleet finally set out, it was the most diverse armada the galaxy had ever seen. Velcor precision, human chaos, Kithara ferocity, all working toward a single goal. Moving a black hole turned out to be exactly as difficult as it sounded. The gravitational tugs had to maintain perfect synchronization, or the black hole would destabilize and consume them. The journey took weeks, and twice the fleet nearly lost control. But the humans, as always, refused to quit. Captain Elena Vasquez, now commanding a much larger, much less jury-rigged ship, kept the fleet coordinated through sheer force of personality. "Come on, people. We've moved moons, asteroids, and at least one planet we're not supposed to talk about. A black hole is just a really dense soccer ball." When they finally reached the rift, the sight was breathtaking and terrifying. The tear in space-time stretched across half the horizon, glowing with colors that didn't exist in normal reality. Energy cascaded outward in waves, warping light and matter. Amara stood on the bridge of the lead ship, staring at the rift through the viewport. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's do something stupid." The black hole was positioned at the rift's center with agonizing precision. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rift screamed. Reality itself seemed to buckle as the black hole's gravity clashed with the rift's expansion. Light bent in impossible angles. Space folded inward, and then slowly the rift began to shrink. It took 6 hours. 6 agonizing hours of holding the black hole in place while the rift collapsed inward, its energy siphoned away by the gravitational well. When it was over, the rift was gone. In its place was a stable, dormant black hole, held in position by a network of gravitational anchors. The fleet erupted in cheers. Humans, Velcor, Kithara, everyone was shouting, laughing, celebrating. Relis stood on his bridge, watching the humans dance in zero gravity, and felt something he hadn't felt in centuries. Hope. In the aftermath, the galaxy changed. The Velcor conclave didn't collapse, but it evolved. They opened their councils to other species, including humans. They shared technology freely. They admitted for the first time in 11,000 years that they didn't have all the answers. Humanity, meanwhile, continued being humanity. They built impossible ships, started improbable colonies, and solved unsolvable problems. But now they weren't doing it alone. On Earth, in a small cafe overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Commander Sarah Okoye met with High Commander Relis. It was an informal meeting. No politics, no treaties, just two beings sharing a drink. Relis took a careful sip of coffee, his mandibles twitching at the bitterness. "I have spent my entire life trying to understand your species," he said. "And I am no closer to an answer." Sarah smiled. "That's because there isn't one answer. We're not a logic puzzle, Relis. We're a story. And the best stories don't make sense until the end." "And has your story ended?" "Not even close." She raised her cup. "To new chapters." Relis clicked his mandibles in what might have been a laugh. "To new chapters." Above them, the sky was filled with stars. And somewhere out there, humanity was already planning their next impossible feat.